Your shin size over 34.75 centimeters? Brian, you'll never make it as a climber. In recent years, researchers have tried to predict bouldering and sport climbing performance by measuring and quantifying multiple physical parameters. Papers emerged where scientists looked at climbers' upper body strength, forearm muscle oxygenation, ACT and free genotype, BMI and calf circumference. However, finger strength is likely still the most reliable predictor of rock climbing performance. But does more finger strength automatically transfer to improved lead climbing? I've spent years trying to understand why some top rock climbers score exceptionally well in finger strength measurements and why some don't, but can still perform at a very high level. Here are some of the things I've found. As far as I can remember, I always wanted to be a good lead climber. I started climbing in the early 2000s and was fortunate to have access to an excellent bouldering gym. Back then, climbing gyms were still rare, and unless you had access to a decent crag, it was challenging to train for lead climbing. But I had to work with what I had. Climbing plastic boulders helped me develop decent finger strength, but I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that my endurance sucked, and so did my lead climbing. My instinct was that having strong fingers should allow me to use a lower percentage of my maximum strength to grab the holds and thus get less fatigued. I wasn't the only one thinking along these lines. To this day, some authors suggest that strong fingers are good for endurance because blood flow occlusion is a function of the percentage of the maximum voluntary contraction. But this approach is oversimplified, and I'll explain why. Finger strength standards are usually based on the 7-second 20mm half crimp or open hand passive hang measurements. If you can complete the test at 150% of your body weight, your finger strength is pretty good. This simple approach has advantages. It introduces a standard that makes it easy to compare climbers. It's based on common hold types that engage the majority of the climbing muscles, but it also has its drawbacks. It's a passive measurement that does not accurately reflect how muscles work during climbing. Standardization is not as easy as it seems. Some climbers perform the test in the half crimp position, while others default to the open hand grip. Moreover, climbers have various hand anatomies, making specific hold positions more challenging for some of them. A 20mm edge is not always the same. For example, the Beastmaker edge has a different radius than the notoriously difficult lattice rung. Finally, rock climbing is not only about holding flat edges. Imagine the climber's finger strength expressed as a radar plot. Here you have the 20mm half crimp strength, which is universal. But here you have the 10mm full crimp finger strength, which is not necessarily directly related and depends more on skin conditioning, pain tolerance, intramuscular coordination, etc. Now, let's add the free finger drag, the pinch, and the slopers, and we get a more complete characteristic of the climber's finger strength. The number of parameters increases rapidly, and I didn't even mention the rate of force development for each of these holds separately. So, by running the test on a 20mm edge, you're only looking at a small fragment of a bigger puzzle, and a climber who is not great at crimping could still do well on slopers or pinches. For lead climbing performance, forearm endurance is just as crucial as finger strength. Even if you have fingers of steel, you won't get far if you quickly run out of steam. So how do we measure a climber's endurance? Have you ever heard of critical force? In short, critical force is the percentage of maximum finger strength a climber can maintain for a very long time, or ideally indefinitely, unless they fall asleep. You may compare that to running. As long as you're trotting at low speed, you can keep going for a long time. But as soon as you exceed a certain threshold, you'll quickly start getting fatigued and eventually have to slow down. There are many ways to measure finger critical force. You may shorten or extend the test time to evaluate either anaerobic or aerobic endurance. You may also opt for either active or passive methods. I like to perform passive 7-3 repeaters at various loads between 45 and 80% of the climber's maximum voluntary contraction, or MVC7. That lets me visualize how the climber's finger strength decreases over time. The passive approach correlates well with climbing ability because good climbers rely on connective tissue strength to prevent fatigue rather than actively squeezing every hold they grab. Of course, when training, we want to reverse the situation and actively engage the forearm muscles, but that's a different story. Here you can see the test analysis plots from two different climbers. One has stronger fingers, but which is the better lead climber? If your answer is B, then bingo, you nailed it. That's because climber B has a much higher critical force compared to their body weight. Now you might think, so what? I'll just build more finger strength, shift the curve up, and I'll be golden. Yeah, well, that's what I thought too. But that approach turned out to be flawed. The thing is that it's not possible to move the curve up evenly. If you just increase your finger strength, the curve will tilt and your critical force will remain the same. That's because the ratio between strength and endurance is not fixed. If that were the case, boulderers with high finger strength would also have the best endurance. Sometimes it's true, and the best boulderers are also excellent lead climbers. But more often than not, boulderers get pumped quickly. That means that to improve your forearm endurance, you need to train specifically for it. Can you do it on a hangboard? Yes, this is possible. The method is called endurance repeaters. First, you need to determine your 20 to 30 mm half crimp critical force. Next, you use a pulley setup to set the correct training load. Then, you spend the next 2 to 3 months doing boring 45-minute sets of 7-3 repeaters. If you do everything by the book, you should see improvement in your half crimp critical force. I certainly did. In the period between June 2019 and January 2021, I increased my half crimp critical force from 29% MVC7 to 43% MVC7 by almost exclusively doing endurance repeaters pyramids. But did that help me become a better climber? Not necessarily. We have a similar situation to the one we discussed for finger strength. If you're working on a particular hold position, you will see improvement, and there might even be some overlap with other positions. Still, ultimately, the adaptations won't be very climbing specific, and you'll be missing out on other aspects of your climbing like technique, mental game, and tactics. That's like training for a specific test, not for lead climbing. Imagine you're evaluating a lead climber after a long climbing season where they climbed various rock formations, engaging multiple hold positions evenly. If you then measure their 20 mm half crimp critical force, it will be representative of their overall finger endurance across variable positions. If you then start hammering endurance repeaters off-season, you will improve only a fragment of their performance. Although their test results will improve significantly, their lead climbing level will remain more or less constant. So a much better method of training finger endurance for lead climbing is to do a lot of submaximal climbing mileage. But what routes should you choose? In his article, Steve Bechtel recommends that you climb multiple routes 2 to 3 grades below your red point level to improve endurance and avoid getting pumped. This approach makes a lot of sense. If the routes you go for are too close to your maximum ability, you might fail because you make a technical mistake or lack the strength to perform an individual move. Of course, you may tweak your training and choose short, steep routes with powerful moves to stimulate anaerobic endurance, or go for longer and more even pitches to favor aerobic endurance. Still, the principle stays the same. Endurance training takes time, and you must spend a lot of time on the wall. This approach certainly worked for me, and over the last 2 years, I've noticed that although my finger strength kept declining, my endurance and overall lead climbing improved. Of course, it would also be ideal for my finger strength to improve, but I found it challenging to train endurance and strength concurrently. That shows that more finger strength does not necessarily mean better endurance, and that you might improve your lead climbing while actually losing finger strength. Climbing is a complex sport, influenced by a multitude of factors beyond physical strength. Technique, efficient movement, precise footwork, and strategic body positioning can significantly reduce the strain on your fingers. Moreover, mental fortitude, tactical decision-making, and even your overall fitness level contribute to your climbing success. To focus solely on finger strength is to neglect these other crucial aspects. So does finger strength training even make sense for lead climbers? I'll discuss this in upcoming videos. But until then, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.